All right, we are gonna get started.
Yay.
Oh,
I'm super
well,
glad.
we'll see how long we go.
Yeah.
All right, so we are in Deuteronomy chapter 16. We're beginning in verse 9. Um, we finished the Passover, and
Yep.
so now we're looking at the next. Okay, so you shall count seven. So after the Passover, and remember that we've talked about first fruits being in the middle of that, which is the first time they start the harvest, all of that. And so now begin to count the 7 weeks from the time the sickle is first put into the standing grain.
So 7 weeks from when they start to harvest.
Right. 7 weeks from the day of the first fruits.
Okay.
Okay. From the Sabbath, from the day after the Sabbath in the middle of
Passover.
the unleavened bread.
Unleavened bread.
Then you shall keep the feast of weeks to the Lord your God with the tribute of a freewill offering from your hand, which you shall give as the Lord your God blesses you. Okay. So the reason he is mentioning these three particular festivals is that these are the three festivals that every male is expected to come to the place where God's name dwells.
Gotcha.
Okay. So these are the festivals that are festivals where they're supposed to all appear in Jerusalem.
Gotcha.
Okay. So this gives 7 weeks, which is 49 days.
Okay.
And it's the day after the 49th day. It's the 50th day is the day of Pentecost.
That's a pretty popular number too.
Uh-huh.
That 50 and then
Yep.
the 7. Super popular numbers.
Yes. Okay. So then you shall keep the Feast of Weeks to the Lord your God with the tribute of a freewill offering from your hand. So remember that the first fruits offering was a requirement in promise for the rest of your harvest. At Pentecost, you're giving an offering of your own free will. It's not an expected offering. So how much you give is up to you.
But it's like a fellowship
offering,
right? Like you go to be with.
And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God, you and your son and your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, the Levite who's within your towns, okay, the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow who are among you, at the place that the Lord your God will choose. Don't forget your backpack. We'll see you in the morning.
Wow.
Okay, so notice, and this is why this is important. You bring your family, and it is a rejoicing.
Mine says it different.
Okay.
Mine's like it doesn't name all your daughters, male servants till after the part where he says, before the Lord your God at the place
Okay.
will choose as a dwelling for his name. So that's what he's talking about. Is what he's talking about there is the temple, right?
Yes, or well, at that time it'd be the tabernacle.
Okay, tabernacle.
Later it becomes the temple.
But wherever he in the land that he just gave out,
yes,
he chooses.
You will come to the place where
okay
his dwelling place is.
Dwelling for his name.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
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 Now, you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and you shall be careful to observe these statutes. Now, most scholars hold that the Feast of Weeks commemorates the beginning of the giving of the law. That's remember
the Ten
Commandments. Remember that they travel for 3 months to get to Sinai.
Yes.
Okay, which would be 30-day months would be about 7 weeks would be almost. Okay. There's a detail within there that's the commemoration of it.
Gotcha.
Okay. How the calendar works, my brain is not working that well tonight. So, but you shall be you'll remember you're a slave in Israel, and you shall be careful to observe these statutes.
Yours says Israel, mine says Egypt.
Slaves in Egypt. I'm sorry. You were slaves in Egypt, and you shall be careful to observe these statutes. See, I'm scattered today.
So where they come from Israel and become slaves in Egypt.
No, the idea is that they are now. So remember, they're about to go into the land of Israel. I misspoke. They're about to go into the land of Israel again as a nation.
They were originally there before the whole Egypt thing?
Well, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob
were originally from that area.
Right. That is the land that God had promised them. What he is saying is that what you will end up doing is, and like I said, I misspoke because I'm tired, but he's saying you'll all come to the place that I choose to put my name.
Yeah.
And make sure that at that time, part of the reason that you are to do this is you are to remember that you were a slave in Egypt. And so be careful to observe these statutes, because this is a remembrance of your slavery in Egypt. And really, what it really comes down to is it is a feast of rejoicing over the harvest. It's a feast of rejoicing over the law. It's a feast of rejoicing over their freedom from their slavery in Egypt. And see, that's a major thing. This is the summer feast. Okay, because if you'll remember, Passover falls March, April in our calendar.
April, yeah.
Pentecost is in like June, July. So it's the summer festival. And so really it's two things. It's part of it is the harvest. And part of it is a remembrance of God's deliverance. And so this is a celebration. They make free will offerings in thankfulness for what God has done. They kind of have a party before God. Okay. So then whenever he finishes that, then he moves forward another few months into the year. And now we're in late September in our calendar. We're in the 7th month of their year. Okay. You shall keep the Feast of Booths for 7 days. Now, there are actually two festival days that are not mentioned here that happen between Pentecost and Booths. The Day of Atonement and the Feast of, or in order, the Feast of Trumpets, which is their new year, and the Day of Atonement.
How'd they ever get any work done with all these feasts?
Well, but think about it. It's a week off in the spring. It's a week, and really it's not technically a week off. What it's
still doing stuff.
The first and last day you can't work, but in the middle there's some work that can be done. Then you have one in the middle of the summer, and then you have another about 2-week period with a bunch of festivals. So they actually fall very interestingly, because you've got a full week in the spring, which is 3 of their festivals.
Yeah.
Because Passover, unleavened bread, and first fruits all fall within 7 days.
Mm-hmm.
Then Pentecost is always a Sunday. And it's 1 day. Yes.
The Feast of Tabernacles, is that the Feast of Booths that you're talking about?
Okay.
It's just called Booths.
So the terminology is kind of important. What is a tabernacle?
It's
a tent.
Oh, I was gonna say,
Okay.
a church.
So the reason that, by the way, before the temple, it's called the tabernacle because it's a tent.
Oh, and then that's what was moving with them everywhere.
Now, technically, the Feast of Booths is not living in a tent. As weird as this sounds, it is a wooden frame covered over with leafy
Like
branches.
a too.
Sort of. So what they did is, and it seems to be, at least at some level, they set this up in advance, that you would have in Jerusalem, once the temple was made, that some of the houses in Jerusalem would actually have poles up on their roof.
Oh.
Almost like, maybe the best example, not exactly the same, but if you go a block that way, they have that big brush arbor. You know, the big wooden frame
Yeah,
that's
that
outside of the
Methodist
Methodist church.
Oh yeah, yeah. The
Okay,
little
so-
gazebo.
Well,
It's a brush
it's a
arbor.
brush arbor.
Okay.
Okay. Now, when they were in use on a regular basis, it is my understanding that they would take the top of that and they would cover it with
Leaves and stuff.
probably hay, thatch. Okay. So remember that what we think of as a roof in our culture is not what has always been a roof.
No, they've been like straw roofs.
Mhm.
In fact, I watch a
Now-
guy do those. They're pretty
Now,
cool.
a Jewish roof would have been a little more similar to what we think of when we think of adobe.
Adobe being this
Okay,
like
so
stucco,
it's
like
a straw, it's a
Like
straw
mud.
mud
the mud. Okay,
brick. It's a straw mud brick type
got
design. The reason we know that, and one of the best ways that I can explain it, is remember that in the New Testament, it says that those four men, they got up on the roof and they began to tear off the roofing material.
and then lower the guy down. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So for a roof today, you would need an axe to do that
Yeah.
because they're wood and they're
Yes.
nailed and
Yeah.
okay.
But that's what you wouldn't. You would just be.
But a booth is more temporary than that.
Okay.
It is, and it tells us, not here, but it tells in another place, that they are to take palm fronds and other types of branches and leaves, and they build a roof for their booth, and they live outside under their booth for a week
For a week.
in
To remember
remembrance of the
the
time that
traveling.
they were
Homeless and
intense.
yeah,
Okay.
which I think is a pretty good idea.
Right.
Like-
It fits very much. Notice it fits very much with the entire discussion of remember that's so big in Deuteronomy. But it also tells us, and you said, how'd they ever get anything done? Well, the feasts also corresponded with their harvest year.
So they were harvesting.
Well, but it would be the beginning or the end. Okay, so 7 weeks from the first time you put the sickle to standing grain, which would mean it would be the end of the barley harvest.
Chances are their fields wasn't very big anyway.
Right, but they would have finished their harvest season and now was a short break while they're,
Mhm.
and then the Feast of Booths is when you have gathered in the produce from your threshing floor. So it's actually the end of harvest and your grapes for the wine press. So you have now finished all the work of harvesting for the year.
And I know somebody's explained this to me before, but I my brain's not working. Very sorry. What do
Okay.
they mean by
So a threshing floor.
because I hear it all the time in the Bible.
So a threshing floor was a place. This is the simplest way. It's a place where they threshed wheat and grain.
But what does that mean?
Okay,
Chris?
so I'm going to explain. So when you think of a grain, you think of just the little seeds. Okay, like almost like
Oh, yeah.
popcorn.
Oh, popcorn.
Okay, is just the seed.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it doesn't come that way. And that's true with all. Wheat and barley come in a head.
Yeah.
Okay. And inside the head are the seeds, but then in addition to the seeds, there is a lot of very light material, which in harvesting they call chaff. The purpose of it is if the seed naturally germinates, then the light parts will actually carry the seed a little ways from the mother plant.
So it can.
They
Right.
throw it up, let the shaft,
Right.
the shaft.
So the threshing floor
from the trash.
is they take all the heads of grain and they set it on a floor in a slightly elevated place, okay, where there's a decent breeze.
Okay.
And they start out, they take items they can beat these heads with, okay, and they break them up. Then they take a shovel or a rake or a special tool for it, and they grab a big batch of it and they throw it up in the air. Well, the seed itself is heavy enough that it will fall right back down, but all the light material will blow away. And that's how they cleaned the grain.
So it's like a separation method.
Separating the trash from the seed.
Gotcha.
Now we do that through machines, but the process is still the same. You break apart the head.
Yeah.
Okay. And then after you've broken apart the head, then you get rid of all the light, useless stuff.
It's kind of like a combine come along, picks it up,
Uh-huh.
and then it goes up and it separates the seed and stuff.
Uh-huh.
Back in the trash can.
That's pretty neat.
That's actually why it's called a combine, is because it does multiple things.
Oh, combines a bunch of steps.
Uh-huh. It's a thresher and it's a harvester and a thresher together.
Nice.
Okay.
Okay.
So, and by the way, understand that's true with other things. In this case, we're talking about grain specifically.
Yeah.
But remember that one of the biggest inventions in American history was what they call a cotton gin. Okay. A cotton gin was for the purpose of separating the seed from the fluff of a cotton plant.
Oh.
And it was a machine that did that. You would bring in the cotton comes in a bowl. And the cotton, what we think of that we make our clothes is actually is technically the chaff of the cotton plant.
There's little seeds in that cotton and it separates them.
I didn't know there were seeds in it.
So if you let cotton go wild, then eventually those seeds will separate out and the cotton carries the seeds on the wind.
Oh, okay.
Okay. In the case of cotton, both things are useful.
Yeah.
So a gin does the same thing as what threshing does with grain. It's a little bit different, but it separates the seed from the fibers,
and it keeps.
And then the fibers, well, it keeps both. The fibers are used to make clothing. The seed is then sold to grow more. So we're talking about the way agriculture really works here.
Okay.
Okay, so a threshing floor is a place where you separate grain.
Okay, I'll see. Thank you. I totally got a better understanding of it now.
Okay, so he goes on and he says, you shall rejoice in your feast, you and your son and your daughter, your male servant, female servant, Levite, sojourner, fatherless, and widow who are within your town. So once again, all the people, okay, for 7 days you shall keep the feast to the Lord your God at the place that the Lord will choose. Okay. Because the Lord will bless you in all your produce and in all the work of your hands, so that you will be altogether joyful. So watch, here's once again, okay. The Feast of Weeks is kind of the beginning of the big harvest season. You've brought out some for first fruits, but now you're really beginning the harvest season. So you all come together in rejoicing over the harvest you're going to have.
Yes, because the Lord's going to provide for you.
Then you harvest, and once you've done all your harvesting, all your threshing, all your pressing of your wine, okay. So the wine press is the discussion of, once again, with grapes, you take all the grapes, you put them in a special design deal, and you walk them out and get the juice out.
Or
yes.
a concrete thing.
Okay.
And then walk them.
And at the end of that, then you come back and you celebrate with the Lord again. What you doing? No. Not in the sanctuary.
What are you doing?
Getting water.
Okay.
Cause I'm speaking tomorrow.
Okay, so at the end of the harvest season, then you come and rejoice over the harvest you've had.
Okay.
Okay, so 3 times a year. Okay, so verse 16 kind of settles this up. 3 times a year, all your males shall appear before the Lord your God at the place that he will choose, at the feast of unleavened bread, at the feast of weeks, and at the feast of booths. And they shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed.
What does that mean, empty-handed?
They will bring a gift to the Lord when they come.
Does that mean, like
A sacrifice of some kind. And then it goes on. It says, every man shall give as he is able. So it's not the same for everyone, but as God has blessed you, then you will bring. And by the way, let's also make sure that we understand. In some ways, we're also talking about the idea that there's also a level of giving with the expectation of how God is going to bless in the future.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but as you're blessed, as God has blessed you, then you offer a return to the Lord.
Yes.
Okay, so then in verse 18, we move away from festivals and feasts, and now it says, you shall appoint judges and officers in all your towns that the Lord your God is giving you. Okay, so a judge is one who determines what's right.
Yeah.
Okay,
Deals
determines
with the
between
law.
people. Now, it goes a step further, though. It says, in all the towns that the Lord your God is giving you according to your tribes, and they shall judge the people with righteous judgment. So understand very, very quickly that God says you need to appoint judges, and when you do, they need to be good judges. Verse 19, you shall not pervert justice. You shall not show partiality, and you shall not accept a bribe. For a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and subverts the cause of the righteous.
Mine says twists the words of the innocent.
Uh-huh. Justice and only justice you shall follow. Okay. Oh, why is this so important?
Because these are all the things that the people that were inhabiting the land before stopped doing and weren't doing, which is why the land
Okay.
spit them out.
That's part of it.
And that's how God is.
Does God show partiality?
No. God is this day, he wants them to be like God.
So the judges you appoint should make justice like I do. Okay. The Lord doesn't accept a bribe.
Yeah.
Justice and only justice you will follow. Okay.
I don't know what you would bribe God into.
Well,
Made everything. Oh, God,
Yeah.
God, if you give me this, I'll do this for you.
uh-huh.
No, I've done that.
Now,
I've totally prayed like that.
now there is a level here that we need to make sure that we dig into. This is not saying there should not be mercy.
Yeah.
Okay. It's speaking of two different things. Okay. Justice is getting what you deserve.
Oh.
Okay.
And I want mercy all the way.
Okay. Mercy is not getting what you deserve.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's us.
Right. Now, what this is saying in this case of justice, what it's talking about is don't favor one side or the other because they have money or because they have position or because
They're your friend.
uh-huh. You need to look at it and see what the correct answer is
Not
and do it that way, regardless of who the parties are. Okay. Now, as we leave that, then we move into some forbidden forms of worship. Okay. You shall not plant any tree as an Asherah. Okay. Beside the altar of the Lord your God that you shall make.
What is a sure?
Okay. It's a pole. And it's a pole to a pagan goddess.
fertility goddess.
For a fertility goddess.
think I've asked that question.
Okay. So this is what it's really saying. If you're going to make an altar to the Lord your God, okay, and remember, they can make an altar, they just can't sacrifice on it. But don't have an altar for God and then next to it put a pagan altar.
Yeah, that would be stupid.
Okay. Now, in this case, we're talking about a natural altar. Don't plant a tree in reverence to a pagan god and set it next to the altar to the Lord. What is he really saying? Don't hedge your bets. Okay. Then it goes on, you shall not set up a pillar. Well, remember, and this is part of this discussion too, a pillar is another idea of a pagan place of worship. Okay. And there's a lot of very interesting dynamics. Remember that God told the children of Israel, when you make your altar, what were they not allowed to do?
It had to be natural.
Yeah, they weren't allowed to cut the stones.
They weren't allowed to cut the stones. They weren't allowed to do mortar
Yeah.
on just an altar. Okay. Now, the altar of the temple is a little different, but apart from that,
Yeah.
the idea is that you are not allowed to fashion and shape an altar the way the pagans do.
Yeah.
Okay. So then it goes on. So now we've seen these two things they're not to do. And then it goes into sacrifice, and it says, okay, you shall not sacrifice to the Lord your God an ox or a sheep which has a blemish. Okay.
Skip 22. Because mine says, and do not erect a sacred stone for these.
That was the pillar.
Oh.
That was what we talked about as a pillar.
Okay, so then okay.
Yeah. Okay.
I have to go to the next one.
So now it says that your sacrifice cannot have blemishes.
Yeah.
So you can't sacrifice the animals that you wouldn't keep. You sacrifice your best animal, not your worst animal.
Not the one.
Yeah, you can't get rid of the one you need to get rid of, huh?
Uh-huh. Okay. For that is an abomination to the Lord your God, because you're giving your leftovers.
Or your not
Uh-huh.
good stuff.
Now, by the way, that is a discussion within the story of Cain and
I was
Abel.
gonna say, it's not what happened with
Okay.
Cain and Abel.
Well, we don't know exactly. Cain was a farmer, so he had grain.
Yeah,
Okay. And it says he gave some of his grain.
but not the first or the best.
And then Abel, it says he brought the best of his sheep.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a lot of discussion. Well, was he supposed to bring something that would shed blood? Well, that's part of that too, but God allows grain offerings.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, it wasn't accepted. We don't know if it was just his attitude or whether he brought leftovers or what. It may be a combination of all of those. Okay. But it is an abomination to sacrifice an animal that is marred.
You have to give your best.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Perfect.
Right. Well, and it's the reason why that is, remember, it's also part of the reason that you see within the discussion of the crucifixion, his bones weren't broken and all of that. And in fact, it goes up to the point as, remember that, and this is specifically a Passover discussion, but what the Bible says is that on the 10th day of the first month, you go and get your lamb.
Yeah, and you have to keep it
Okay.
at your house, right?
And you keep it for till the 14th in order to examine it, to make sure it fit this criteria. Now, on the 10th day of, or we're pretty sure around the 10th day of the first month is when Jesus comes into Jerusalem. Okay. For the next several days until the crucifixion, what are the priests and the Pharisees doing? They're asking him all sorts of questions, trying to get him to make a false statement.
Trying to kiss
See if
it.
he'll slip up.
So we go through all of that. And then finally, we have a very interesting moment during the trial of Jesus. What does Pilate say?
I find no blame in
I find no fault.
fault.
What has he just said? I find no blemish.
Yeah.
He is the lamb without blemish. And then the crucifixion happens. All of this is part of the picture of Jesus, but it's also a part of the discussion of here's how we prove that you are doing what you're supposed to and that you are treating me with the respect and honor I deserve. Okay, so then it goes on. If there is found among you, okay, within any of your towns that the Lord your God is giving you, okay, anywhere in Israel, if you find a man or a woman who does what is evil in the sight of the Lord your God, okay, in transgressing his covenant, and has gone and served other gods and worshiped them, or the sun or the moon or any of the hosts of heaven, which I have forbidden. Okay. So there is a very specific discussion here. Okay. And it's interesting to look at it. Okay. Because we're talking about a sin that you really can't do by mistake.
No.
There are a lot of breaking of the law that you can do without intent. But worshiping other gods is
Back
that
then anyways. Because I sometimes feel like we accidentally consider television as like,
I don't think we
It's-
accidentally do it.
okay, maybe not accident. I try really
I
hard to keep
understand.
it like under control, but I am like super addicted to TV and my
I
phone.
understand.
And I sometimes wonder if that might be an idol
Yep.
in my life.
Okay. Well,
But
then
put it before the Lord.
Yeah,
So-
and I've always
so-
been afraid to do that because I'm afraid of what he's gonna tell me.
Uh-huh. So that's a decision you have to make. Now, in this time, it's a little easier
Yeah.
to determine that. Okay. But the idea is if you have worshiped, okay. Now, what is worship?
Prayed to, committed or done rituals for
Right.
rites and which I used to do when I was wicked.
Uh-huh. Yep. Okay. But worship is also you sacrifice to it. So if you sacrifice your time, your money, you sacrifice other things that are important for something, then there is a level at which you're giving it worship. Okay. Yeah, we all struggle on that one.
Oh, I totally
Okay.
struggle with that.
But that's part of this. Okay. So in this case, it has gone and served other gods and worshiped them, or the sun or the moon, or any of the host of heaven. Okay. So he's getting into all the pagan and astrology and all of that, the things I have forbidden. And it is told to you, and you hear of it. Then you shall inquire diligently. And if it is true and certain that such an abomination has been done in Israel. So you receive a report that somebody's worshiping other gods.
Yeah.
You go and you find proof that they're doing it so that there's no doubt. Okay. Then you shall bring to your gates that man or woman who has done this evil thing, and you shall stone that man or woman to death with stones. On the evidence of 2 witnesses or of 3 witnesses, the one who is to die shall be put to death. A person shall not be put to death on the evidence of just 1 witness. Okay.
That's good.
The hand of the witnesses shall be first against him to put him to death. and afterward the hand of all the people. You
So
shall,
they're the first to throw the stone?
yes.
Okay.
So they have to be confident enough
To
in the
put
charges
stone.
to be the one to throw the first stone. Okay.
That would be hard for me to do.
Uh-huh.
Even if I knew they were guilty, it'd be hard.
By the way,
Right.
don't miss where this law fits into the story in John chapter 8.
Yep. He who has not sinned cast the first
Okay,
stone.
so you're his accuser. Someone has to throw the first rock. So whoever of you has no guilt,
Throw the first rock.
And who's that?
well,
Nobody
only
does.
Jesus.
Nobody but Jesus. Yeah.
Mhm. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. Okay. Then it goes on and it says, if any case arises, this is verse 8, between one kind of homicide and another. Okay. So this is the idea. So if you kill the person on purpose or you kill the person accidentally, okay, or one kind of legal right and another. So in other words, and really it's any of these, one kind of legal right or another, or one kind of assault and another. Okay. Any case within your towns that is too difficult for you. So here's the idea. Remember, they've appointed judges.
Oh,
So if a case comes to the judge that you're sitting there going, I don't know. I don't know what to do. I haven't figured it out. Then you shall arise and go to the place that the Lord your God will choose. So you go to the tabernacle or the
in
temple.
whatever town he put pictures.
And you shall come to the Levitical priests and to the judge who is in office in those days, and you shall consult them, and they shall declare to you the decision. So watch, this is literally what this is doing. It is saying, you will continue the practice that you did with me. This is Moses saying, so they're going to appoint somebody as the chief judge, one of the Levitical priests. Now, so that means it's a son of Aaron.
Yeah.
Okay. Who will be in charge of rendering verdicts.
In case you can't make a decision.
In the same way that Moses set it up, where there were a bunch of smaller judges that would take care of simple matters. And if a big thing came up, okay, bring it to Moses.
Yeah. So basically.
Uh-huh. Okay. So
Be like our Supreme Court.
basically, it is exactly the same idea. In this case, it would have been one person at this point who was dictated to do that. But yes, that's the idea. So in our own legal system, which is based on this idea, you go to a municipal court,
Yes.
which is just the town.
And then you go to a criminal court.
Well, it could be a criminal, or it could, the next way would be a district court, which is a small area, then a state, and then a federal district court, which is multiple states. And eventually, if they choose to hear it, you go to the Supreme Court, who is the highest court in our country. And whatever they say, there is no one to appeal to.
Yeah.
So that is the right idea. That is the idea here, is you will go to the priests and to the judge who is in office, the ones who you consult them, and they will give you their decision. Okay. Then you shall do according to what they declare to you. And you shall be careful to do according to all that they direct you.
Yep.
Okay. So in the time they're in, that would have been Moses. If Moses handed down a ruling, that ruling was final. It was as if it came directly from God, because it did. Okay. In this, whoever the judges are, what they say, God has given them that decision, and it is final. Okay. According to the instructions that they give you, and according to the decision which they pronounce to you, you shall do. Do not turn aside from the verdict that they declare, either to the right hand or the left. The man who acts presumptuously by not obeying the priest who stands to minister there before the Lord your God, or the judge, that man shall die.
So even if a judge comes and he brings him, and if he doesn't do exactly to the letter everything he says, then that judge is gonna die.
Yes.
Okay. Pretty.
Okay.
intense right there.
Once you have, so watch, once you've taken the case to that level, if you don't do what they say,
You're dead.
okay, so you shall purge the evil from Israel, and all the people shall hear and fear and not act presumptuously again. Okay, now this is the most interesting, this is one of the most interesting spots. We're going to finish, hopefully we'll finish the rest of 17 and then we will stop, because I want you to see this, because this is talking about a time when they have a king.
Yeah.
Okay, so remember, and by the way, this is an important idea. You have the priest, and then it brings up the judge. Okay, the judges that we see in the book of Judges are tribal leaders.
From every tribe of
Yes.
Israel.
Okay, so Judges actually covers several areas of Israel.
Got you.
Okay. But the idea of a judge was the primary leader of that tribe at the time.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have all of them, and then the last of the judges, and he actually ends up really being a ruler over all of Israel, but he's a judge. The last of the judges is Samuel. Okay. Samuel. Okay. Now he is a technically a priest. He has been working in the temple. Okay.
Is he
He would be a Levite.
Levite? That's what I was gonna
Okay. So, but all the way back in Deuteronomy goes, okay, when you decide you want a king.
Which you will.
So verse 14, when you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it, and you dwell in it, and then you say, I will set a king over me like all the nations that are around me. Which is exactly what they said. Okay. You may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. You don't get to pick him, God gets to pick him.
Yeah, there's no democracy here.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Leadership.
One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. So he has to be a Israelite. You may not put a foreigner over you who is not your brother. Okay. Now, verse 16 gives one of the things we have talked about several times. Only he must not acquire many horses for himself. Okay. Or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire horses. So he doesn't get to go back to Egypt to get horses. Okay. Since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again. Okay. In addition, verse 17, he shall not acquire many wives for himself. Remember Solomon?
Yep, and all the wives and horses. Not just wives.
Lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver or gold.
David had a lot of wives though too, didn't he?
Nothing compared to Solomon. David had 9.
Oh.
Solomon had 1,000
Holy moly.
between wives and concubines. Okay.
Okay.
So now watch. Because this is a very, very powerful way of looking at this. First of all, he must be an Israelite. And what he should not do is he should not collect for himself the trappings of pagan kingship. a massive army of chariots and horses and okay,
Oh,
military power.
military power, lots
Okay.
of wives.
Should not gather to himself wives, which is, and by the way, let's make sure we understand. Okay. This is a very pagan way of looking at it, but it is literally what we're talking about. Horses, military
women.
power. Okay. Money, exceedingly wealthy, or under the idea that a king was to be a military powerhouse, wealthy, and virile.
It's wife, so
Right. So all three of these things are major elements in what a king.
for pagans was.
By the way, it comes into several of the things that we see later in the Old Testament. Absalom goes in, and David had left a group of his concubines, okay, in Jerusalem when he fled from Absalom. Absalom comes in and goes up on the roof of the
Oh, yeah.
and sleeps with his concubines.
And wasn't Absalom his son?
Absalom was his son. But here's the idea. If you, and by the way, this is a critical element, okay, in several places. If you slept with the wife of the king, you were saying that you were taking his spot. Okay.
Like usurping him.
Right. Absalom does this. And then later, Solomon has a guy killed because the guy asked for David's nursemaid, is kind of the idea. She's technically one of his wives, although they never consummate and what it says is David is super old. Okay. And he can't keep warm at night. So they have a young woman
To keep him,
who lays in bed with him every night
to keep him warm.
to keep him warm. Well, one of Solomon's adversaries asks to make her his wife. Now, what is he really doing? Well, he's saying, well, she was David's wife, so if I'm
with her by proxy, I'm better than him.
I'm king.
Yeah.
So he's trying to steal the throne, but being sneaky. But anyway, so don't act like the rest of
the world.
Right. Now, this verse 18 is the part that is very, very interesting and definitely something that we need to understand the way this works. And when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, okay, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law approved by the Levitical priests. So literally what it means, and we don't really know if it's only Deuteronomy or if it's Genesis through Deuteronomy. But literally the first act of a new king is to go in and take a copy of the law and word for word copy it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, by the way, he has to go in and go to the Levitical priests and say, here's my copy, read it. And if they say, yes, this is a good copy, then he's good. If they say no, then he's got to do it again.
That would suck.
Okay. It shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life. So notice the picture here. He must write his own copy of the law of Moses in his own hand, in his own,
words.
And then for the rest of his life, he uses this copy of this scroll that he has written himself by hand to study the Word of God every day. Now, what's the point of that? Well, it says that he may learn to fear the Lord his God. So there's a very powerful element to this. The point of it is, hey, king, remember that you're just king in,
Because I said so.
I'm the real king. It's God saying, I'm the real king, you follow me. Okay. There is never a specific place where it mentions one of the kings doing this. Okay. We do have one that is kind of important with the discussion of Josiah, which, by the way, tells us that it had not been being done. Josiah is a southern king. Okay. The northern king has been gone for almost 100 years at this point. Josiah becomes king as an 8-year-old boy. And he is a good king. He is trying to follow God. Apparently, his mother or one of the advisors was very much trying him to be faithful to the Lord. And so one of the things he decides to do is he goes, I want you to clean up and refurbish the temple.
Oh, and that's when they find the scroll to do
They
it.
find a scroll of the law, which means, by the way, that for the first 12 years of his kingship, he had definitely not followed this.
Yeah, because like they
Because
never
he
know.
finds the scroll, hey, read this, and he reads it, and oh my God.
I've been doing it all wrong.
Or he'd been trying to do it right,
Yeah.
but then he goes on a tear, breaking down every altar, breaking down every pagan place. He
Cleans everything.
he cleans house. Okay. But the idea here is very, very important, and it comes back to the theme we've been using all through this. If you're reading it every day, and by the way, if you've written the whole thing in your own hand, and then are reading out of it every day, then what are you going to do about the law?
You're probably going to memorize it.
You're going to remember it.
Yeah. That way you don't not do it.
You will fear the Lord and keep his words and his statutes, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers. So a king is not above his people. Okay. And that he may not turn aside from the commandment either to the right hand or the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. Now, there is an element to here that we need to understand, because it is one of the differences between a judge and a king in Israel. A judge, just because you were a judge didn't mean your kid was the judge.
But if you're a king, then it does pass down your
A king, by definition, is your king. Whenever you die, your son becomes king. By the way, it's one of the reasons why we see Jonathan die at the same time as his father, even though Jonathan was righteous. God took Jonathan at the same time so that there would not be a squabble between the next in line for Saul. Jonathan should have been the next king. And by the way, he would have been a good king from everything we can tell. But God rejected Saul. When God rejected Saul, he goes, it's not just Saul he rejected his entire lineage for the rest of
eternity
to be king.
Yeah.
He chooses David. And while David still doesn't get it all the way right, David comes to a point that God says, because you have loved me, and really because I chose you, I'm going to make your descendants kings in Israel forever.
And Jonathan was
the son of Saul.
And him and David were
like best friends. Okay. But understand, this idea is that a king is not to be lifted up above his brothers, and he is not to lift himself up above the commands of God. He is not truly the ultimate authority.
No, God is.
By the way, David gets this lecture. I brought you out of the sheepfold to make you the shepherd of my people. They are God's people. They're not David's people.
God's.
Now I'm letting you shepherd them as their king, but they are still my people. Okay. All right, we're going to stop right there. I hope this wasn't confusing and scattered. It felt a little bit scattered, but
It made sense to me.